Thank you very much, Dr. Hick. That was amazing. And let's get to Perry's question. She asks, share an overview on attachment styles and how we attract or repel those with either similar or opposing attachment styles. And our
Ooh.
group right now is reading Attached by
Oh,
Amir
good.
Levine. And he's talking about anxious attachment benefiting from dating more than one person at a time so that they don't clench their fists around that one person. And that comes back to the scarcity and the abundance conversation that we had a moment ago. And then understanding that the push-pull attraction, Dr. Hick touched on it earlier about the familiarity. So from there, I'll let you take over on the attachment styles, because I could go all night and I know you could too.
Yeah, I know I could too. Well, here's my spiel on it, because I think it's important to understand where it comes from. And this may be a little bit of repeat from what you're reading in Attached, but hopefully it'll feel relevant. So attachment is based on the bond that you first build with your caretaker, and it becomes integrated into your sense of self, like your idea about who the people are in the world, if people are generally there for you, available for you, helpful to you or not. And then you take that kind of version of what relationships generally are into your adulthood. Research says that they're generally stable. Your attachment style is generally stable across time. However, there can be repairs that happen that change it from an insecure attachment to a more secure attachment, or what we also call earned security. So other attachment figures such as therapists, which I'm a huge fan of therapy because long-term therapy actually is shown to change your attachment style. Secure partnerships, teachers that you're really involved with, everything can change it. You can also see changes with adult relationships that aren't so healthy, changing what was previously a secure base of attachment to less security. So it's always important, even if you started out with one, that you're actively working on improving the security through having secure relationships. Let me explain what secure means. So if a caregiver is available to meet your needs as an infant, you cry, they come, they soothe you, they know how to soothe you, not perfectly, but good enough. You know, they do what they can to figure out, what does this cry mean? When you fall down, they don't rush to helicopter, but they go, oh, are you okay? Okay, yeah, cool. I'm here if you need me, but no big deal. But, and they let you go off and explore the playground and come back. Let you go off on dates as a teenager and come back, right? There's a little bit of flexibility in how they show up for you, but they're consistent in their responsiveness to you. And they usually do with warmth. And that's what we call secure attachment. So you believe that you're worthy of people showing up and being available in your life. And that generally becomes a secure attachment in your adult years. There's two groups of insecure attachment. Well, three groups really, but there's two main groups: the anxious and avoidant. Sometimes it's called preoccupied or ambivalent. So if you see it in the research in other ways, it's all the same thing, just different researchers like to call it different things. And then avoidant, which is also called dismissing. And the anxious attachment, they generally have parents that for one reason or another are inconsistently responsive to the child's needs. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. That might be because of work, that might be because a lot of siblings, you know, mental health issues, a whole host of things, sometimes within the parent's control, sometimes not. And because they're inconsistent responding, the child develops a sense of, I must stay close to my attachment figure or I won't get my needs met. So there comes in that clinging behavior where they literally they have separation anxiety. They won't let mom leave the room or dad leave the room. Then you see them grow up and they tend to be more clingy in relationships, be more preoccupied with, what does that mean? What does that text mean? Well, they didn't call. What does that mean? Kind of putting together, like preoccupied with putting together the information to see, is that person going to be available or not? They tend to attract people that aren't available to meet their needs because that's a familiar pattern for them, right? Mom was inconsistent, dad was inconsistent. So I better stay close, make sure I call them, make sure I text them, make sure, I stay in contact with them. Otherwise they might kind of just jet. Rewind to avoidant, they tend to have caregivers that are consistently unavailable for one reason or another. They might have a parent who died. They might have a parent that has an addiction, mental health issues, their own attachment stuff, all sorts of reasons, sometimes within their control, sometimes not. And so the child basically goes, well, that person's not going to be there for me. I got to do me. Like, I got to survive this world on my own. And the thing about it is they fall under the radar because they look really self-sufficient growing up. They look very independent and self-reliant, which in American culture is pretty valued. And so they fly under the radar as like not really having needs, but they do have needs. They have needs for closeness, but they've pushed those pretty far away. So then they get into relationships and they have things that distance them from being close in a relationship, hobbies, working, traveling, other priorities that may seem really important, and can be important, but serve to create distance in the relationships. So the fourth category, which is not talked as much about, but I know you've mentioned on your podcast, is the fearful avoidant, also called disorganized, also called unresolved attachment, which usually comes from traumatic experiences in childhood or beyond, where there's kind of an inconsistent, they have both. They have avoidant and they have anxious, and they kind of flip back and forth depending on who they're with, who they're around. So it can sometimes be the more confusing style for the person experiencing it, because they're like, well, I was at this point, and now I'm this way with this person. And you talked about it on today's podcast, I thought, really nicely, in sharing what you experienced with it. So the second part of your question, I know I just gave you Reader's Digest view of that question, but can you repeat that, the last part? I don't want to get that wrong.
Yeah, how we attract or repel those with either similar or opposing attachment styles.
So I'll go with the repel. There's a lot of truth to the saying opposites attract for insecure attached people. So the secure attracts secure. They're kind of a similar, they're both pretty good with closeness, pretty good with having their own space. They kind of are flexible with that. But I see it most that an anxious isn't probably going to be with an anxious, right? Because it's not an opposite. It's kind of, think about a magnet, and an avoidant isn't going to be with an avoidant. And even to some degree, an anxious or an avoidant person is probably not going to feel too great with a secure, because it's not going to be enough charge. So when we think about chemistry, which, man, chemistry is a really overrated phenomenon, I would say. Like, it's there, right? But most people will judge a potential relationship based on how much chemistry there is. And that's actually, if you feel that much chemistry in the beginning, it's because of that charge. It's because of, the anxious and the avoidant kind of locking and pairing about some familiar patterns. That's a familiarity. That's why your brain is lighting up with chemistry. Your body's lighting up with chemistry when you feel that, because it's an old familiar pattern. It's like, oh, I want to fix this. I want to redo this from that earlier childhood pattern. And we're masters. We're always creatures of trying to master things. So, what is familiar to us that didn't work before, we're kind of like geared to want to fix it. So we go after what maybe we know consciously doesn't really work for us. It doesn't get our needs met, but feels like there's a pull to it. So we tend to see the anxious and avoidant. And it's not to say an anxious and avoidantly attached person can't be in a relationship. It's probably going to require a lot of work. It's going to require some couples therapy, but people make it work. And if both people are in individual therapy, they might have earned some security within themselves that their default pattern might be, the avoidant realm or the anxious, but they can usually come back during times of not conflict to come back to a little more security. I know that's a lot that I just said.